Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the last session of Xenotopia Symposium. My name is Irfan Vyasi, and I'm the curator of the symposium. And I'm thrilled to have you join us for this exciting lecture series, which complements the Kahar and ecological speculation within the Web of Life exhibition taking place at Coach, New Delhi, with the generous support of Goethe Institute. Over the course of three discussions, the Xenotopia Symposium will bring together scholars and thinkers from around the world to explore the intersections of ecology, urban landscape, feminism, socially engaged art, both within and beyond geohistorical context of Iran. The term Xenotopia encourages us to reconsider the connection between art and space. By combining Xeno, meaning foreign or other, with Topia, meaning place or space, it challenges us to explore art in unconventional, non-traditional settings beyond the white cube. It urges us to think of art not as commercial commodity, but as a transformative force that can intervene in everyday life and reshape our environment. The Xenotopia Symposium offers a chance to imagine new possibilities for artistic practices that exist outside conventional spaces, and we are excited to embark on this journey of exploration and speculation with all of you. Today's talk, titled Infrastructures of Resonance, Easier Said Than Done, marks the third session in our series. I'm excited to introduce Nato Thompson, an author, curator, and what he refers to as a cultural infrastructure builder. In 2021, he co-founded NFT art commissioning organization artwrld with Walid, Raad, and Josh Goldblum. artwrld leverages potential of NFTs to create and distribute historic artworks with some of the world's most visionary artists, while also building a more credible and meaningful art world. In 2020, Nato initiated and now directs an alternative art school, an online global art campus with a faculty that includes Janine Antoni, Trevor Paglen, Mark Dion, Yael Bartana, and others. Today's talk will focus on a term Nato coined in his book, Seeing Power, Art and Activism in the 21st Century. This is Nato's first book to be translated actually in Farsi. And I've had the privilege and the honor of carrying out this important task of sharing Nato's alternative worldview in the arts within Iran's territories. And that's the book, if you let me see it. Yes.
It's just the best thing, Irfan. You're the best.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, Nato, and we look forward to it.
Right, Irfan. Listen, you are also a cultural infrastructure builder. This symposium is an alternative infrastructure. And I'm excited to be in the Zoom with all of you. Thank you, Patricia, for that. So I'm going to talk about this idea of cultural infrastructures, and basically to kind of set my cards on the table of what it does in a kind of simple way is I always joke, I'm like one part Marxist, two parts Machiavelli. But I do believe that, just to be simple about Marx, money makes the world go round. And this idea simply is that the way we think about art is deeply affected by money. And I want to talk about, as opposed to thinking, what I consider the bad Marxists of the world are the ones that point at things and find capitalism and say, I found capitalism, it's all over. Whereas I'm like, okay, it's like it's like a fish pointing at water. It's kind of like everywhere. The trick is not, hello, Supriyo, my friend. But for me, it's more about money also represents power and capacity. And I want to kind of tie the two things together. One is a certain kind of understanding of how money works, but also how that affects the ways we think. And for me, art is not just art, it's a way of thinking outside the constraints of the given world. And rather than thinking that we can think of the world just by being really creative and thinking and going to school, my proposition is one of the ways to think about the world differently is to change the structures and systems and behaviors and people we encounter. The structures of the world shape the way we think. If you want a new way of thinking about art, participate in different structures. If just as an example, I'll be very pedantic. If you walk, I'm in New York City right now. This city has a lot of commercial galleries. It was one of the biggest commercial hubs in the world for contemporary art. The problem of that is that the dominant narrative around what art constitutes is shaped by the vast commercial infrastructure present in New York City. Does that make sense? People actually think art is stuff for sale in a gallery. But in my opinion, art is supposed to be anything. Really wild. Art doesn't have to look like art. Art is supposed to be a ticket of freedom, of expression, of creativity. And while certainly it can be a painting on a wall for sale with a label, it certainly doesn't have to be. And there are economic reasons why it tends to look that way. Okay, so there's a project I'm working on. And for further, just to kind of spell it out a little more, like I said, I am a cultural infrastructure builder. And while I'm not involved in that project around NFTs that Irfan mentioned earlier, my interest in them was particularly, and me and Walid Raad, the artist, was around the production of alternative currencies, which I thought was an opportunity to produce alternative infrastructures. Does it make sense? That like, rather than thinking of it as like this speculative, creepy online thing, which is true, it was, it is, all money is, the opportunity to galvanize money as an artistic medium to produce different ways of seeing the world, different structures, is really important to me. Here's the last thing I'll say, and this took me forever to realize. And no offense to academics, but a slight offense. I couldn't figure out why professors could never get anything done. And I realized that the tools, and this is a giant statement, but just let me say, the tools of thinking about the world are very different than the tools of doing things in the world. I do things a lot. I make things a lot. Do you know what it means? I have to send a lot of emails. I have to be on time. I have to communicate with people. I manage budgets. I manage deadlines. I try to get things done. I make contracts. These are the skills that we all know of doing things in the world. The world conflates thinking about the world with doing things about the world. And I'm a big fan of thinking, but most often thinking reflects on the, academic thinking often reflects on the world produced by those that do. Capitalism does. It's a skill of doing. People that go to business school learn to do. They don't learn why. That's the problem. But they certainly learn how to. The problem is, much of the left progressive world really spends a lot of time thinking about the world. But the doing part is given a little bit of short shrift. And I think particularly when it comes to doing with money, it gets even more short shrift. Does it make sense? You follow me here? But the world is made by things done. And so if you want to shape the world, you have to change the way the world exists, the infrastructures, the machines. Okay, you get me here. Now, the other thing I'll say about sympathy for progressive or politics of liberation and social justice and equity, pushing back on power is very hard. People in power don't have to have a plan to have it work. Power flows and aggregates. A golf dad on the golf course who comes from a family that's very wealthy, and he goes golfing with his friends and they're very wealthy and they trade ideas around stocks. They're not particularly genius. They just trade in a milieu of power. Power tends to flow, power tends to aggregate. I only say that because the idea of alternative infrastructures, producing structures that push up against narratives of power, art that isn't playing by the rules of power is hard. And the life of an artist to feel, to be in the world enchantingly, to actually like sense things, and to kind of build a life that's non-traditional is very hard. I know this because I turned 50 and I realized my life's always going to be hard. I thought it'd get easier. It just is always hard. But then I think to myself, well, what did I think was going to happen? I set up a life of pushing up against power. It's not easy. And I have a lot of activist friends that beat themselves up that we're losing and losing and losing. But I think we just have to be kind to each other and realize it isn't easy. It's just not easy. It's not like they have a better plan. Just pushing up against global capitalism and the powers kind of gangster global capitalism is hard. They got a lot of tools at their disposal. Okay, so let's back up a little bit. Infrastructures of resonance. The important thing about infrastructures of resonance is something very simple about the human mind. Presence makes things real. And what I mean by that is the reason advertisers will show you an image 15 times is because if you see things 15 times, whether or not you agree with it, it is real. The more you see things, the more they are real. A building in a city that's giant, that shows art, like MoMA or the Hermitage, is real. And you see it. And it confirms reality because it exists. Does it make sense? And the reason it's there is because of money. Advertising also understands presence is reality. So, when artists make images, it's just to say, power understands scale and repetition. So in the digital space, why? Just we know it, but of course, on our Instagram, yes, we can communicate, but it's the internet of 2020 and the internet of 2025 is very different. The war for your attention, which is secretly the war for your reality, is very expensive now. People spend a lot of money to be real in your head. You get me? You follow me? Why is that important? It's germane to ideas of infrastructure. So what I'm trying to say is presence costs money. The funny thing of that is, for example, and this, I'll be more specific about the art world, but the commercial art world of Pace or David's Werner or Hauser & Wirth, that art world represents 0.00001% of the art made in the world. And it sucks up like 68% of the brain space in media. Does it make sense? We have these weird moments where people understand the world based on that vast disproportionate percentage because they believe the power of presence versus the reality of what's happening. I have this wonderful thing. I run this thing called the Alternative Art School, which is also an alternative infrastructure. But the great thing with your group here too is that I get to meet with artists all the time who are not part of Hauser & Wirth or David's Werner, but I'm also able to put my finger in the water about the real scale of real art. Does it make sense? Like I surround myself with artists that are not that world. And what's important to me about that is not just, and we'll talk about this, it's not just that I get a better sense of what's going on, but the way art happens in Sotheby's or Christie's or Hauser & Wirth, and I'm not a hater, I just want to say this, looks the way it does for a particular reason that is not applicable to you. It has nothing to do with you. It never will. I can't tell you how many artists, nevertheless, when you ask about their favorite artist, it comes from that 0.00001%, whose lessons have nothing to do with you. Nothing. That art looks a particular way because it serves a particular asset trading class that I'm assuming we do not have anything to do with. Does that make sense? But artists still play the game as though they're part of a club they're not part of. It drives me crazy. I'm like, it's one thing to make art that looks like that because you're selling it for millions of dollars. But when you make art that looks like that and it's not selling at all, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? You're playing a game you're not even invited to. Okay, but this actually has lessons beyond just the arts. People's understanding of politics, people's understanding of any issue, healthcare, how families should be structured, gender, identity, it goes on and on, is constructed by the conditions of power that shape the world we see. You get what I'm saying, right? Here's the difficulty. Not the difficulty. So when I make a call for infrastructures, we're not just doing it because it's good to be in an alternative art school or something like that. It allows us to produce new realities together. Does that make sense? In, artists coming together to come up with their own forms of art is not just like kumbaya, like, yay, we're all friends. It allows you to produce your own presence. If our reality here in this room, if we met daily for an hour, we would produce a different reality in our own minds than what's on our phones. You get what I'm saying? The brain, we humans are not creatures that think alone. We are meant to be tribes. We confirm things through groups. That's how we've been evolutionarily produced, and it's how we understand reality. I can say whatever I want, but when the group tells me it's true, then it is true. You follow me? That's why I always say art is a team sport. And people also can be an infrastructure. This is what it is called legitimation, right? This is legitimation. You can either get your legitimation about your art and personally about yourself from external factors that want nothing to do with you. And that's how most of us live. Or you can build your own community, your own infrastructures to get legitimation from a world a little more intentional and sympathetic to you. You get me? You follow me here? Now, let's go back a little bit. I got all kinds of fun stories about the quandary that this is, because we all struggle with it. For example, I've been doing art my whole life, whatever. And I did a talk at MoMA, at MoMA on a Tuesday night where like 6 people came through the education department. You know how these things are. Maybe you might. My mother was like, the Museum of Modern Art? You finally made it. You're finally a success, right? And you know what? To her, it was true. MoMA has that big of legitimation that everything else on my CV or resume did not matter till MoMA came along. You get what I'm saying? MoMA has power. The New York Times on its masthead says, all the news that's fit to print. And what that really is a statement of the power of their legitimation, which is to say, what they're saying is, if we do not print it, it is not news. Does that make sense? They decide what is news, and MoMA decides what is art. And while certainly MoMA doesn't single-handedly decide what is art, and neither does the New York Times, if you took 8 big powerhouse museums like MoMA and took the aggregate of their artistic decisions, now we're seeing some real power. You get what I'm saying? What's in the collection, what's not. And as much as we pretend that those things do not affect us, all of us, it does. For many artists, art is not just a pursuit of weird, awesome ideas. It's also a deep battle with our insecurities that we don't matter and our stuff is crap. And we tend to benefit greatly when anything legitimates us. Think about your life. For some of you, it's never happened, and I'm sorry. But for some of you, what was the moment you first saw your name in print somewhere? And you thought, oh my God, I exist. I am in the world. I am like out there, right? But that's where you get the first taste of what legitimation does, not just for your career, but in your heart. In your heart. That's what legitimation does. Of course, we all in this group here, we could each write an article about each other. We could. And we should. There's part of you that'll be like, yeah, but I mean, it's just a Zoom room. These people, I don't even know them, but we wrote these articles, whatever. But it still affects us. That's what I want to say. You know what I mean? It helps. I always tell artists, build your own world. So this is kind of my point. But like what I mean to say is just legitimation is a powerful thing. And part of, I always think half of art is just being able to sit at a dinner with in-laws and family and being able to say you're an artist without being embarrassed or have to defend yourself. They'll be like, oh, you're an artist, so you're unemployed. Oh, like all these kind of metrics of what success is coming at you. And I feel like if you've got a team of people telling you it's okay to be an artist, then when you sit down to dinner with all these people that don't care about art, you can say, I'm an artist and I'm not really worried about money. I'm actually trying to build an alternative life, and I have weird ideas around sexuality and desire, and I'm a big freak and I'm really proud of it. If you can have a community that lets you talk like that at dinner, you're winning. You get what I'm saying? You feel me? Like, it's not, what I mean to say is legitimation isn't just legitimating art, it's legitimating your soul. You know, when I was in Chicago, and what's crazy too, I'll say this. Um, um, so there's I'm not, I read a lot of theory, but I try to be very, like, I try to talk normal about ideas, if that helps. So there's this guy, Rancière, he's French, it's fancy, but he has this term called the distribution of the sensible. And basically, I think of like practical, it's like practical realities, which is, for some people, when you say art, you know this, everyone has their own idea what art is. It's really wild to me sometimes, because sometimes I meet these folks and they're like, art is not that. And they get really, they get intense, you know, like religiously intense, like art is this and it's not that. And I'm always like, okay, relax. But what's interesting to me is we all have our own ideas of the realm of things that should look like art in our heads. You know what I mean? We have our ideas of it. That realm of what the reality of that kind of like ecosystem of forms. For many people, art is just painting. You know what I mean? For a lot of people. And art is something weird that kids in their 20s do, and then they get reality and they get jobs and become doctors. You know what I mean? Whatever. But people have their own idea what art is. But what I want to say is it's not just them, it's us. And the only way to expand our realm of the sensible outside of these market-driven things is to be in touch with much more alternative sites. And they're hard to come by. Why are they hard to come by? In New York used to have tons of alternative sites. This city is super expensive. Who can afford to have a gallery space that does non-commercial stuff in the city? But the problem is, with an expensive city, is increasingly the realm of the sensible becomes highly constrained by the market. Does that make sense? Nothing makes me more irritated than alternative spaces that look like commercial spaces. I'm like, what are you even doing? Do you even not get it? So I had the privilege when I was in Chicago of being around this place called Temporary Services. London's the same. Sure. Well, yeah. I mean, every city's mostly commercial galleries is the art scene. You know, I mean, what I like about the school is that I get to meet artists that make other work. And they, you know, most 95% of artists in the world do not show in galleries. Most of us are locked out of a system thinking we're the outsiders. We're the majority. We are like by far the majority. We just don't have any spaces of contact between each other. You know what I mean? It's so embarrassing when 95% of the world thinks they're the exception. That's the world in general. We're all the exception to the 5% rule. We're, you know, so, but it shapes us. Anyways, what I was gonna say is this group in Chicago, it's like, it was this space that really believed in the freedom of art. And they did all this stuff that was so different. They would like have, they always had soup at every opening. We'd all eat soup together. It was very hippie. They had like, they do shows of things like booklets of crazy people in town, or they did like a show of soap bottle labels. They did these things that didn't look like art shows that I'd ever experienced, right? They did, and it was also like, they'd have like activist stuff. They'd have like clothes giveaways at the front. Or one time they put bird seed all through their gallery and just let the birds from outside take it over for 2 months. Another time they made it a warming center in winter where all the where homeless folks from Chicago just stayed in there and they got free soup and they got to get warm from the heat in the building. Just all these things that were like cool, you know, like art, you know, like wild. But what was so interesting to me was in Chicago, they stood out like a sore thumb. They looked like nothing else. And I always feel like if you do non-commercial things with a group of friends for 4 years, you look awesome. You look awesome. And it's like, it's amazing how many people just follow the rules in art. What drives me even crazier is in art. Like, I'm like, you don't have to have an opening at 5 with bad wine and labels. You don't have to. You can, I'm not judging, but you don't have to. You don't have to. You can do anything. When I, you know, it's like, I'd rather have an exhibition that completely fails because they're just taking that freedom ticket and going for it than a show that was like following the rules and doing it all right. You know, we're doing art here. It drives me crazy. But what's interesting to me too, just to say, is that space, temporary services, all kinds of artists came out of that. Theaster Gates came out of it. Tanya Bruguera, me, Trevor Paglen, a bunch of us, like Michael Rakowitz, a bunch of great artists interfaced with that. And they taught me, what I want to say is coming out of that. And then I went to New York and I met this group 16 Beaver that did these kind of theoretical conversations once a week for 6 years in New York. But what I want to say is these alternative sites were my art education. Do you know what I mean? And it was a tiny, tiny space that people came together. But because I got to see, feel other ways of making art, my realm of the sensible became way different. Does it make sense? You following me? Like they did so much education for me because I gained confidence that my own secret worries were valid. I was like, I want art that's awesome. And then they're like, here's some art that's awesome. And I was like, thank the Lord. I thought I was crazy. You know what I mean? Like but I gained confidence. It wasn't just that I saw stuff. I also saw that other people were excited by it and I gained confidence. I'll say a little bit about painting and then I got a few more things and we'll have some questions. All right, listen. I'm in the art world forever. And it's so funny when you've been in something forever and then you learn really basic things that you probably should have known when you started. It took me forever to realize that painting, and I mean paintings that hang on a wall, and no offense to painters there, I'm just telling you, is the lifeblood of the arts. It is the currency of art. Think of it like the blood that moves through the body of art. All the stuff I like is all this effluvia that spins off painting. Like museums survive because paintings are an asset that's one of a kind that you can collect and trade, that really wealthy people for a certain class are able to play a certain kind of game of trading their money around. And because it's a luxury class commodity that has high value, it produces infrastructures across the world. Does it make sense? And because it has an economic truth to it that is pretty intense, it allows the arts to exist. If the only currency of the art world was performance art, you would not see MoMA. People wouldn't be buying and trading performance art. No offense, performance artists, but you get what I'm saying. I was like, it's always so funny because I was like, painting is a one of a kind commodity that you can hang in your house on a wall. I was like, it's genius. It's the most genius creation I ever heard of. This is why, if you're an artist that wants to make money and you don't make paintings, you're in trouble. But like all things in life, there's a double-edged sword to it. It's also, it can trick you into thinking that's what art is. Art isn't that. Art can be that, but it isn't just that. And I think you understanding how different mediums play in the ecosystem of the arts is helpful. I'll also say, as I did mention, I am 1 part Marx, 2 parts Machiavelli. To build alternative infrastructures in general for those with the wherewithal like you, Irfan, the skills of doing are very different than the skills of thinking. To do things in the world does require compromise. Money is not, I'm not going to be one of these people absolutists like all money's evil. Certainly there's more money that's evil than others. But you do need money to do things in the world. I'm just going to break it down to you. I think the weak way to think of money, I hate it, frankly, is the patronage model of begging rich people for money so that you can do your left-wing progressive things. Kurt Vonnegut has a saying, which is, we are what we pretend to be, so we must be careful what we pretend to be. If you laugh at rich people's jokes for a living, you will one day think those jokes are funny. You will one day start thinking you are them. Be careful the pretender that you have to be and how often in your day you have to be that. Have you ever wondered why Jeff Koons still kisses the ass of rich people even though he's so rich? You ever wonder what he's doing? That's because he got famous from kissing rich people's asses And now he doesn't know what else to do because it's what he's always done. You get what I'm saying? Do you understand this? And you could do an art history of artists that just are really good at kissing ass and got confused along the way. Like that's a true art history, right? Where they're like, I just kissed people's asses and told them I was a genius, and then suddenly they believed it, but I thought they were funny. And now I'm a just total douchebag. And I go around the world giving lectures about how you should just kind of be a star artist, and it's totally useless knowledge. So, like, all to say, money when it comes to infrastructure is important. The other thing too, this lecture is called Infrastructure Resonance, Easier Said Than Done. Yes, I started the alternative art school. It is really hard for me to run. I'm not rich. I grew up on welfare. Not that you guys all know what that is, but it means I'm poor. And I don't have some giant bank account. But I really believed in this kind of Black Panther kind of spirit of shared resources is political. You know what I mean? It's hard because artists don't like paying for things. They love free shows. They love the patronage model. They like museums being free. They feel like they deserve it. But nothing in life is free. There's a guy, Ian MacKaye, who is part of this band Fugazi, which is part of this punk kind of movement in DC called DC Hardcore. And he's, and they would always be like, all albums are $5. And they were big in infrastructure resonance for music. And he was like, I hate free because I want to know where the money's coming from. He's like, somebody's footing the bill somewhere. You know what I mean? And he's like, I'd rather if we collectively own the power, that's more power. It's hard for artists to think that way, but it's important for us to think that way. Like if you want to start an alternative space, share resources together, have some skin in the game, like be a team together, and money is part of it. I really believe that. And I think artists are very allergic to money, and it doesn't help us. It really doesn't when it comes to this stuff. And also too, an art space that does its own things, you can find places, just to say, you can have an exhibition space that's the size of like a kitchen. You can do tons into that tiny space. I have an artist that I know in Houston from the school. She has an exhibition space in a refrigerator. She's done 28 shows in it. Is that awesome? I think it's so rad. I want to have an international, coalition of refrigerators. It's just, but it's cool. What I mean to say is it's not about scale. It's about efficacy over time to produce presence that produces realities. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So here's the thing. I mean, I'll say this. I'm from the United States. For whatever reason, and I don't know why, I can think about it. We have a thing called the nonprofit system where wealthy people donate and there's government grants and all this kind of stuff. And many people in the world often are like, I wish we had a nonprofit system. And certainly the way things are going, we might not soon enough. So be careful what you wish for. But that said, yes, we have a crazy person in office, but not for the first time. I will say that the problem with the nonprofit system for me is we do have, I've been in a long time. We have basically the heads of arts organizations that beg money from wealthy people. And then those tastes and dispositions become the tastes and dispositions of the directors of art organizations. And so while they don't explicitly censor things, you suddenly have an organization whose taste realm of the sensible is directly correlated to the director's ability to raise money with wealthy people. You get what I'm saying? It's not censorship so much as a very constrained idea of what art is. And that structure is deeply corrosive. And further, in the activist realm, there are more people in the world paid to save the world than ever before. There are more jobs literally saving the planet than have ever existed. And they're predominantly philanthropic driven. You get what I'm saying? It's an interesting world we are in. But the opportunity to produce alternative structures with values and understanding of economics, sort of Marx, frankly, loved capitalism, in my opinion. He was an economist who tried to be an activist. He was much better economist than he was an activist, frankly. I think the Communist Manifesto was him kind of winging it, but Das Kapital is what he actually wrote. And to be fair, I think he really appreciated the power of capital. And while I'm not a capitalist, I am a fan of the power of money to produce power collectively, self-intentionally, more like an anarcho-syndicalist, I'd say, if you want, you know. So I do think there's opportunities to build alternative infrastructures. I do hope some of you will come over to the alternative art school. You know, I have two economic models that I'll pitch. One is that right now our membership at the school is $25 a month, which is about the price in the United States of a Netflix subscription. So we say the best art school in the world for $25. The other thing I've learned through the school is these weird realities, whereas we produce community, which in my mind, the word community is an infrastructure, people that produce your own reality. We have artists from around the world, but artists don't like paying for community. They think they've already got one. I swear to God. Artists often feel like, I've already got a community. What I need is a show. But the fact of the matter is, the person most likely to give you a show is someone you know. So get to know really awesome people. It's just a fact. And the other part is, like this room, meeting people around the world that are really dope artists is a great way to live. Talk about, if you want to talk about like radical subjectivities, whether it's sexuality, race, geography, cultural, this thing we're doing, this Zoom thing in a room, well, certainly seems more ubiquitous and familiar to us. It is historically very new. And the opportunity to build alternative infrastructures and community around the world with intentionality, not just around art, but just around being, is profound. It is a profound opportunity for all of us. We no longer have to get on a plane and spend $500 or $1,000 to fly over here. You know, this used to be things that only wealthy people could afford. Now, broke ass people can build community around the world. Diasporic immigrant communities can build networks together to support each other. There's profound power in this. And, you know, one of the things we do at the school too is we like to take the global North money and subsidize the global South, which is to say money trades differently globally. The US dollar is different in Bogota than it is in Miami. You get the idea. But that's, rather than thinking that as a problem, think of that as an opportunity, you know? And at the school too, when we have an artist from New Delhi in a room with an artist from Istanbul, in a room with an artist from Des Moines, Iowa, they all have something to offer each other. That's what's so interesting. Knowledge is sharing, and radical difference is sharing. So I think I'll conclude on that. It is a bit of a pitch for the school, but it's also, it is just me putting my money where my mouth is, which is I get tired of artists proposing utopian ideas that never happen because they're just lazy and they don't like to work. Like, I like things that actually happen. I'm really interested in changing the world, not just talking about changing the world. And I deeply believe, you know, I wrote this book, Infrastructure Resonance, way before I started the school. But I also felt like I wanted, you know, in this world, like, it's easy to tear down systems. And, you know, funny enough, I have many activist friends that want to tear down the world too. But tearing down the world, you find strange allies. You know, destruction puts you in league with all kinds of forces. But building requires a certain kind of coherency, dedication, and vision that is a team sport. It's nothing you can do alone. But I think that's what our kind of world needs, is radical building together. Okay, so thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Nato. It was fascinating as always. Yeah. I want to talk about like this very specific term in Islamic philosophy, which is called artwrld, which means active intellect, which is a source that can bring out something different out of an object. So for example, when you put a sword into a furnace, the sword becomes red. And then you realize that redness, that like heat, was also already part of the potential, one of the potentialities of the sword. And I see Nato Thompson as one of those like active intellects. But when you talk about him, when you're like next to him, when you're exposed to his worldviews, something different comes out of you. You start looking at the world differently. And yeah, I consider you as one of the artwrld folks.
I love that phrase. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it comes from it's a term that Islamic philosophers actually borrowed from Greeks, Aristotle and Plato. عقل فعال. Yeah,
So good.
yeah. And also, I have some notes, not a question. I hope people have some questions, but like, for example, when you say like artists can do anything, and that's actually something that you hear a lot from artists, but that's for justifying the absolute atrocity that they just painted. You don't hear you can do anything from an artist and then seeing them doing some radical like political stuff on the street. You just usually hear that you can do anything when you're encountered with a bad painting, you know. So you can do anything. Like that's anything can be art. Like anything can be art, but you can be also more radical, man. You cannot be within this framework of like, you know,
But I
commercialization.
try to be like, I will just say this just to be kind of two things real quick. And we know it's a long story. But I do believe in some ways, and I know this can be it's a slippery slope. But first and foremost, I think operating in a non-utilitarian manner with your life, which is to say, you don't have to necessarily be political in your life to be political, which is your way of being is a form of politics, right? If you can find, and sometimes art is a way to shape a way of being in the world that runs counter to the dominant structures of the world around us. So just to go to your kind of Sunday painter that's like, art can be anything. I will say sometimes painting is a gateway drug. And by gateway drug, like an entry point to which they can find other ways to be. Does that make sense? Like, I think it's okay that people give themselves space to dream, to just explore a flower, and to just pause and to not run in the. I think politics has a modality, or power has a modality that's in our beings, that if you can reshape that being, it's an important step. So, and I also think activism can sometimes be too harsh on people who are just trying to breathe, that are like finding space. Now, I understand there's a privilege sometimes, like, the far end is like the bougie activists that are like, my yoga is my resistance. And you're like, okay, relax. But you get what I'm saying. I also don't want to be too heavy handed on like the literalness of activist art to have to always make people be doing something. You get what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's Ron Sear's idea of politics as controlling time and space. And I think just being political means it can also mean think about the relations within spaces differently. And that's something that you're talking about in terms of like creating new infrastructures of resonance and also places of transversality.
Yeah.
Yeah, where new relations can actually occur, just like the fridge that you mentioned. It's not a fridge anymore; it's an art gallery. It has a new functionality, you know.
Well, yeah, it's cool about that too. It's like we do these experiments in my class where we give each other shows. Like in one of the groups, they made a WhatsApp exhibition, and they did like, and another one was like one person would meditate and the other person would draw what the person was meditating on without talking. But what was cool about those experiments was people all of a sudden realized they had a show at their fingertips every time, you know? And it's a really cool experiment. You know what I mean? Like that refrigerator, it's not just a refrigerator, it shows the potentiality of your home. Like to your point of that phrase, whatever that was, that like the fridge is also an exhibition space. That's cool, right? It's like all of a sudden you're looking at your house, you're like, hot damn, I got exhibition spaces all over the place. It's cool.
Yeah, definitely. And also about the fact that like not being part of that world, the 0.0001 point world. And also, I think one thing that is important um, is to also realize the power of the periphery, because many of the artists, maybe in Iran, they are independent thinkers and they're independent sort of curators, artists, etc., because they have not given a chance of being part of that 0.0001 realm.
It's fun too. Like, so we could, I mean, part two could be talking about social capital. But when I first started this thing called the Creator Time Summit, but even at the school, and you're doing it here, like I always leverage social capital to legitimate non-famous stuff. It was like I use famous people to legitimate non-famous people. So like I would have Okwe Enwinzer do a talk, and he knew the game. I mean, like, you're doing a talk so that I can get this anarchist feminist collective from Bolivia to do a talk. And he's like, I get it. You know what I mean? But like sometimes activist stuff only wants to fetishize the 0.0001% without understanding that you leverage these powers to produce new realities. Does it make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that I'm doing with the Terran Summit.
I know. I see it.
Yeah.
You're
That's
good at it. It's cool.
Thanks to you, man.
Yeah, they
One
like
of
that
the
too.
main pillars of this
But
creative
also too, it's so funny about famous artists is they need to be legit. Do you know what I mean? They can't just be up there. I mean, some of them, like they can't just be like always doing Hauser and Wirth stuff. Like they gotta like look like they care. I'm joking, but like, but what I mean to say is they need you too. You know what I mean? They're like, it's an interesting game out there. Don't hate the player, hate the game is what they say.
Yeah, definitely. And also, can you talk about more about the relation between legitimacy and this collaborative thinking, and also the canon of art? Because in one of the passages in the book, you talk about the fact that these like art movements didn't were not created overnight, and it was not done by just one person.
I mean, that's the thing. If you look at art history, it's so funny because they look like gangsters, like Dada, Surrealism, all these European art movements, whatever. It was groups of people legitimating each other. And generally there was somebody that would be called the like the Jay-Z, you know what I mean? Or the Dre, like somebody that was the like making the deals and hustling the back rooms character, whether it was George McCunis of Fluxus, whether, every movement had its kind of operator who was like cracking deals in the back room to make this stuff legit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, get aboard for the situation is international, for example.
I mean, he was one of the more cantankerous ones, but I think like but what's interesting to say is they make way more sense as gangster movements than they do as just art movements. And rather than being cynical about that, that's how power works. Like you're a tribe and you got each other's backs. I always tell artists, build your tribe. Like find 7 artists that you're like in cahoots with and have each other's back. The mistake is most artists never have each other's back and they're very jealous, and any opportunity their best friend has really intimidates them and it's a nightmare. You know what I mean? Artists can be very jealous of each other. But like if you could coordinate it, it really helps. I mean, just to put it out there. And even a broader sense, and you don't have to be traditional about it. I will also say one of the confusing parts of the historical moment we're in is it's very much punctuated by complexity, which is there's no longer a Western dominant narrative the way it used to exist. Somebody said it's decolonialism by superpowers. Like India loves Indian artists, you know what I mean? But it's only the like famous Indian artists, and like Russia loves Russia, and everyone's like really interested in non-hegemony for their own hegemonic needs, if you get what I mean. Like, so it's like an interesting moment, but it's not the same as where there's a clear canon anymore. Like the canon is way more confused in a good way, but weird.
All right, Ali has a question.
Yeah,
Hi,
what's
thank
up,
you
Ali?
for your thoughtful insights. My question is actually more of a description of our situation in Iran. In Iran, we don't really have nonprofit institutions that provide funding. I'm an architect and also work across disciplines between art and architecture. The model we rely on for making money is to commercial architect projects, sometimes even the ones that we're not passionate about, and use the income from those to support our conceptual architecture work and independent art. And I think that's the right way to do it, right?
I am totally all about it. I know it's hard, and I will say having no support is really hard. And also having a state that is really not exactly kind to alternative things in general. It reminds me of like Eastern European art during the Soviet era. There's all this samizdat movement and stuff. There was interesting stuff. Like it was a time that also sometimes like necessity is the mother of invention. So like back then it was like all male art, and all this but the art was so good. I saw this show, Samizdat art, from Romania and Czech Republic and stuff. And it was like incredible, incredible. So I think, it is a team sport. And I think like finding alternative mechanisms to produce art together is important. Um, I'm also sympathetic that it's hard to not have structures where you can actually physically go and see each other and feel supported. So I think more than ever, you got to kind of stick together and be emotionally supportive. And like this stuff too, find support outside the country through the internet is probably helpful. And I'm feeling for you. I got you.
Yeah. I think not to kiss ass is hard, but you know what's harder? To actually kiss ass? It's really hard to be a kiss ass and try to just even lie to yourself.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's hard. I mean, that's why you need emotional. That's why community is important, because trying to survive power alone, you could talk yourself into becoming something altogether different.
All right, Satara Sultani, thank you for your thank you for your amazing insights. I wanted to ask about the legal problems. It can be a kind of risky to hold alternative exhibitions here in Iran, since they might think there is something fishy going on. Is there a way past this, maybe by just inviting people we know? I think it's a matter of tacticality, right, Nato?
Listen, I can't even begin to pretend I could give you any advice. You know your system way better than I do. I say be careful. Don't die on the cross of art. Don't get arrested. Don't put yourself in danger's way. It's a tortoise meet hare's life. You kind of have to gentle things together. I do believe in dreams and revolution, but I really know I've been to jail a few times, and every time I'm in a courtroom, I think this was a bad idea. It's not somewhere I want to go, frankly.
Definitely. The same question actually was raised during the lecture of one of the lectures at Tehran Summit that we hold with the Yes Men. So you can check it out. And they're also they're the ones that might know about these sort of like technicalities.
Yeah. I mean, the weird thing too is, as you know, there's no rules, right? Like, for example, it's just weird. Like, you can get in trouble for stuff that you didn't even see coming. Like, it's not like there's like these rules with power that you can follow and then you get it right. You could do something, get away with all kinds of stuff for some reason, and then you can do something very minor and get in all kinds of trouble. And I think that really is terrifying. I would say that's why I think this infrastructure idea is really useful, which is it is also an interesting way to work, which is just being in conversation with others and supporting each other is a very powerful political act that has longer term benefits than just simply going it alone,
Yeah, and especially like in the context of Iran, it's not really about what you do, it's really about what they think you meant, and you really cannot do anything about it. You can be in jail for anything, practically. So, yeah. Paris says,
once you're talking to people while you're in trouble, they're not listening to anything interesting.
Yeah.
I hate that.
Pariso says, thank you very much for your insightful and inspiring talk. In Iran, the Islamic Republic frequently employs architecture and urban planning as political tools to raise or control public spaces. I recently created a book that addressed this issue, highlighting the example of Shahr-e-No, Tehran's former red light district during the Pahlavi era. After the revolution, this neighborhood was forcibly demolished and transformed into what is known as Razi Park. Given this context and considering how authoritarian regimes routinely weaponize the built environment, and erase collective memory and suppress social interactions, what practical and creative strategies do you think architects and artists can adopt to reclaim or reinterpret these contested spaces, transforming them into sites of empowerment, resistance, and renewed collective memory.
Let me ask you something on that question. I don't know the answer. I'll say this. You guys are in the region, you know, what happened in Syria, what happened in Egypt, post-Arab Spring, you know, this kind of moments, right? Or even what happened in Russia, post-falls after perestroika. All of them sort of brutal lessons of what happens when the structure of power falls suddenly, which is, I just want to think about this. I think about it a lot, which is these kind of crazy power regimes in contemporary world eventually crumble. The problem I find, I don't know, you know better than me, is that they tend, I'm always like, how do we build social stuff where when power starts to fail, the lunatics with the guns don't take over? Like, how do you produce a way of social change that isn't so dramatic that it's even worse than what was before? Does that make sense what I'm asking? Because I feel like sometimes archaic forms of power eventually fall. But like, you know, if you're in Russia, gangster capitalism came in like crazy after the fall of the Soviet Union. People would not say their lives are better today. Do you know what I mean? Which is insane. And then in Syria, after Assad fell, like it was chaos. You know what I mean? Like what I mean to say is it's really, and I'm asking because I feel like for kind of propped up authoritarian governments that eventually will meet the needs of a populace that just is way in a different page than them. You know what I mean? I guess the question is, how do you build a civil society that's able to take the next step without letting the lunatics with the guns ruin the whole thing? You get what I'm saying? Is that a dumb question?
No, it's not actually. There was this discussion with Reza Negarestani and somebody
It's
asked
sort of what happened in the Iranian Revolution.
oh yeah. And it's happening right now. And it was like Reza talking about this, the idea that time has radicalized people. And actually the time is something that the regime is very skeptical about it. Like the reality. They don't want to see the reality and how things have changed. And they cannot keep up with it. And that's the Achilles heel. Actually, that's how they will be overthrown.
Because you guys have seen, I mean, that's one thing is like you've seen the, you know, with the green movement and like there are moments where it felt like the scales were tipping. And while they didn't entirely tip, you could see the hints of just a few different things and it would totally be different. But the question is, when that power vacuum opens up, what happens?
Yep. That's the question that we all are like right now. Iranians are trying to answer the power vacuum. Who's going to be, what's the alternative? Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not, I mean, maybe, you know, sometimes I have these moments where I just think these are almost unanswerable questions. You know, I don't know. There's only so much planning one can do. You know? You know what I mean? So I don't have any, listen, when it comes to life in Iran with activism, I would have to be really entitled to think I could give you any advice at all. Frankly, I have no idea. Sorry. I mean, I have my own little lecture I do, but I don't want to pretend I understand your situation in any sense. You know, I'm very humbled to be in this room with you.
It's an honor to have you, Nato. And I think you have your own problems now with the so just yeah.
I know.
All right. So
But, you know,
then
we've always had problems. I mean, I'll just say this, like, I'll just say this in life, which is, you know, as an activist art person, you can really constantly just be let down by the world. But I really do try to understand what a win looks like, what like life affirming stuff is like try to remember, you know, a lot of artists just do shows and don't care what happens. They're just building and growing, trying to constantly working and working and working without like having a moment to take it in and like appreciate, like, you know, Irfan, look at all these people, like this is a win. It just, what's happening here is a win. This different, you know, what's that John Lennon phrase? Life is that thing that happens when you're making other plans. Like it's good for all of us to just also take in the moments that are happening and appreciate this is the life we're building as we're living it, rather than seeing life as a constant set of defeats by power. Because it can be pretty depressing. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks.
We have Sonali that said, thank you for your amazing talk. How do you think meme making would be discussed in art history in the future? Thinking about infrastructure of the internet. Are you a meme person, Nato?
Oh my God. I don't know who's making all the memes in the world, but I want to thank them from the bottom of my heart. I really want to go to the meme factories of the world. Do any of you make memes? Because I thank you. They make my life so much better. I feel like the internet really shows me how funny people are. But you know, the weird thing about history, I'll just say this. It's like, so we had this at the school, we had this curator, Miguel Lopez, who was based in Costa Rica at this place called Tierretica. And they were doing all this like producing art history of queer Caribbean art history from the last 100 years. Okay. And indigenous art history. Right? Writing art history is hard work that makes no money, particularly alternative art histories around artists that aren't famous. You know what I mean? It's not an accident that there are a million books on Gerhard Richter. You know what I mean? It's an industry. But what I mean to say is these, to the question about art history, I think people should write these art histories. Thank God people are still getting PhDs. But it is important work. Even I tell artists, particularly like from Iran, self-historicize. Tell the stories you want to tell while you're living them. No, don't wait for someone to tell them. They won't, that day won't come. You have to build in your own history as you live history. And that is hard work. You know, I keep kind of laying into this. And I'm no offense artists, just some of you, and I love you. I love you. It's all good. You're all my friends. Some of you are a little lazy and it drives me crazy because I'm like, that art history shit is hard. It's like working hard. And like, I think for some of you to take up the torch of like local art histories, counter art histories, it's such a service. I can't tell you how many artists I know that live these radical lives, hoping that one day a museum will tell the story of their life. That day will never come. That day will never come. The more radical your life, the better you better have an art historian on board to tell that story as you live it. So, you know, to the point about the internet, yeah, maybe some people write about memes, but like, you know, like all things, if you want someone to write like a really dope history about memes, I would say go write that thing because I mean, honestly, okay, one more thing I'll say. I got so many. So I watched this documentary about New York City, and it was by this guy Rick Burns. It's like this 8-part series, absolutely incredible. New York City's history is so wild. You know, you watch the Brooklyn Bridge go up. You watch the, you watch them put the grid down. You watch like Olmsted, like building Central Park. You get all this cool shit. And every time a new historical innovation, whether it's like the invention of the skyscraper, whether it's like the production of the locomotive engine, whatever it is, you see these inventions and changes written into the landscape of the city. The city literally looks different. Well, the reason I'm telling you this is in the last 20 years, the most profound revolutions that we've experienced, and certainly I would say AI is insane, are all happening in the internet. And so in weird ways, the city looks the same, but everything has changed. And the way we typically understand this historical evolution is by the change in the urban fabric. We understand it through the visible world of walking through the world. But increasingly, the way history is changing us psychologically, socially, is happening in the digital space in a way that's harder to keep track because the landscape of the internet doesn't change the way a city changes. It mutates, it disappears. You know what I mean? It's not a palimpsest. It is a set of things that come and go. And so even our own understanding how to visualize history has radically transformed in a way that totally blows my mind. I walk through the city now and I was thinking, there used to be posters on like telephone poles that showed you what the next show is and like bands and stuff like that. Increasingly, I feel like the city is the shadow of the internet. It's like, and like more and more I see kids in pajamas outside because it's the city's the bedroom and the internet's where life is happening. Do you know what I mean? But the world, so to the point about the internet, I think it is, I can't even get my head around how much it's changed everything. I mean, history and the internet, it's so different, like how do you even keep track of it all? It's so wild. It's an important history. I think it actually requires writing about history differently too. Okay, sorry. One answer.
Okay, last question. Thank you, Nato, for your insightful talk, expanding from your thoughts about the legitimation that artists crave for. Living in this internet era, we all know the hot trends in the art market. Here, for some artists, it's a need to go against the power structure and speak against atrocities, discuss the harsh truth through their art. But at the same time, it gives an easy gate for some privilege to get easy way of legitimation. What do you think about that?
Well, certainly I'll say this, nothing is ever as it seems, I will say, but for the record, how do I put this? It's important to recognize. So we're talking about sort of social capital, right? Like if you have a famous person that speaks about injustice, so to speak, everyone's like, and I know them, I got famous artists that speak about injustice and they're like, oh, they're so important. And of course, like Nan Golden is like taking down the sex family. It's fine, whatever, but she's Nan Golden. So suddenly it's like the world of activism is famous people, and you're like, there's all kinds of not famous people doing stuff. Okay, fair enough. Let's just put it out there this way. There's only so many famous artists. There's not that many. And in fact, if you talk to your family that doesn't know about it, there's no famous artists. So it's only in our bubble that these people have tons of legitimacy in general. Like the amount of famous artists is super tiny. Do I think some famous artists get some credibility from speaking about activist issues? Absolutely. Do I think it's a waste of our energies to worry about it? Yes. Don't worry about it. That's what they do. You know what's going on. It's okay. Don't get too crazy about it. I think you have to build with what you can control. Build in your constituencies you believe in. Build your own truths. Build your own realities. You can spend a lot of emotional frustration being annoyed with what's happening in the center of power. It's just, where do you want to put your energies? Do I get annoyed that I have famous artists that give lectures about social justice and then meanwhile go backstage and yell at interns? Yeah. Yeah, I do. Do I get annoyed by that? Totally. I just try not to put my mental energies there. Do I think there's giant contradictions with people in power in the art world? Yeah. Do I think there's a tiny amount of them? Yes. I just try not, you know what I mean? What do they say? Taylor Swift, haters gonna hate. I just try not to be a hater. I try to build the people I like. And I try to like, you know what I mean? I try to build from there because if I spent all my, and I know it's hard. Listen, I flip through things on my phone like the rest of us, doom scrolling. I see stuff that irritates me, like waves of irritation. Just like, ah. But, sometimes what you don't want to become is one of these people whose activism is built purely on irritation. Because there's a certain kind of desire for their form of power too that comes from that irritation. You know what I mean? Like, people that hate famous people because they want to be famous people. Yeah. Like, relax. Like, if you didn't care about it, it wouldn't bother you so much. Just try not to care about it so much. You know what I mean? And I understand. I can particularly think about Iran's situation, or sometimes I got a little hint of what you're talking about. I hear you. I got you. Just, it's always going to be there. The question is what you're going to do with it. And frankly, too, I want to say for those famous artists I know that talk to the stuff, it's also good they do it. Just don't take it too seriously. They don't get that famous and rich from it. You know what I mean? It's not like, it's okay. So, what can I say?
All right. I think there's no other questions. We can wrap it up. Thank you so much, Nato. Fascinating as always. Love to talk to you. Yeah, every time.
You're the best. Thanks everyone for being here.
You are the best, and thanks for accepting my invitation. Thanks for being with us tonight, and thank you for everything.
All right, folks. Have a wonderful day. Thanks to Irfan. Thanks everybody. Ciao.
Thank you. Bye.